You discover Bitcoin when most of the people didn't know that it exists.
This is more than just cool technology. It's something that can really change the world. One of the biggest threats to freedom is ourselves. Our natural state is free. People are the biggest enemy to that. People accept tyranny. Some cases there can be benefits of that, but in many, many cases and throughout human history, that can be very, very destructive.
Welcome back to Freedom with Web3 podcast. I'm your host, Cristina Najera. Joining me today, Bruce Fenton. He is the founder of Chainstone Labs, investor, and also the host of the Satoshi Roundtable. How are you doing today?
Great, good to see you.
I'm very excited to have you. Let's start with the early days. You discovered Bitcoin when most of the people didn't know that it exists. Would you like to share why did you think that this could be the future of money?
Sure. I had focused on emerging markets and emerging technologies in my career at Morgan Stanley and with my own investment firm. So I was always looking for kind of what was next. I was lucky enough to be early on the internet. And I thought this might be like the next cool thing. And it was a big decision for me to go to the first Bitcoin event. I was like, should I waste my time? It was very cheap. It was $500 or something. But I'm like, am I going to waste the money, waste the time? It's a weekend. I got to fly. And thank goodness I decided to go. I said, I'm going to check it out. This just might be something. And I went. That was like the third Bitcoin event ever. There was one in San Jose that I missed. That was like the first one. And then this one was just a couple months later. And I went to that and that kind of changed everything. And I immediately I saw the energy in the room. I said, wow, this is something. This really is potential to be. It feels a lot like early internet. It feels like that kind of excitement. And then the rest is history. I just went down the rabbit hole and never came back.
Wow, very interesting. You have been in rooms with people that are key on this ecosystem. What are some conversations that you remember from the early days that until now still stands out?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of them. One of them that I remember well was pretty early, one of the early events. There was a Bitcoin Miami, North American Bitcoin Conference in Miami. And the same day and the same weekend, a whole bunch of crazy stuff happened. So Ethereum was founded. Vitalik gave his first speech, and he was not a polished speaker. He had never spoken in public before. So he was kind of, not super smooth. And he was talking about this new project that he described as, kind of like Counterparty or Colored Coins, that was going to have its own chain, maybe. They weren't even positive they were going to be able to make their own chain. So that was released. Tiger Direct announced that they were going to accept Bitcoin. Overstock was doing some moves. Charlie Lee, who had been the founder of Litecoin, was announced that he was going to be working at Coinbase. And Charlie Shrem was arrested that weekend. He was headed to the conference and he was arrested. And then a couple days later, they had the New York BitLicense hearings, or BitLicense didn't exist, but Ben Lasky had these hearings. And then Roger Ver gave a speech that same day, basically. And he said, I remember, I had a tear in my eye when he was talking about, well, first of all, he said, hey, a lot of you think you're too late because the price is already at $110 or whatever it was. He says, it's not too late. And I was like, oh, good. I thought I was too late. I thought I missed it. And he said, you're not too late. And then he talked about how he said, if this works, we can really change the world. We can make it so that we have more control of our own money and the governments aren't making money that they can print from thin air and have wars and violence and destruction and for-profit prisons all over the world. And it was very emotional. And I remember like my eyes tearing up, and I was in this exciting room. There was, standing room only. People were all crowded in on the floor, and all this crazy stuff had happened just in this weekend. And that was a special moment. I remember that well. And I because it was such a crazy week and it was such a great speech, and it really, onboarded me into the idea of this is more than just cool technology. It's something that can really change the world.
Yeah, wow. I wish I was there when you discovered Bitcoin was $100. And let's talk about Bitcoin. Sometimes Bitcoin is up and people are very excited. but other times Bitcoin is down and some people doubt about it. How have you seen this reaction of the community and how they deal with this up and down and in this space?
Yeah. I think most of the industry is bipolar. I don't know if it attracts bipolar people or if it makes you bipolar, but there's certainly a lot of people whose moods swing, and some people swing with the markets. I don't pay attention to markets too much, and I'm very much long term. But for me, it does affect, especially because the swings are so radical. Many of us who've been around a long time, you can have periods where you lose 90% of your net worth, 80%, 90%. You have these big down periods, like 2014, and other times where it can be pretty brutal. And then other times it goes up quite fast and people get very excited. They say, wow, I have a lot more money than I thought I had. And then they say, oh, I'm going to upgrade my house or my, car or something like this. And that can be exciting and create kind of a little bit of a mania, sort of manic depressive kind of forces. And the whole industry is sort of reflected in that, in down times, companies lay off and time to tighten belts, and in up times, everybody gets excited. So it is a very much up and down kind of thing, over these cycles for sure.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So let's talk about the roundtable. The roundtable is legendary. How did you come up with this concept and how it has evolved with time?
Sure. So Satoshi Roundtable, I had done some big events and worked with my job on a lot of like special events prior to Bitcoin, like the Global Competitiveness Forum in Saudi Arabia, which is now known as FII, and a few other things like this. So I was always interested in something like that. I always liked I had been on a vacation one time at a resort and I loved the idea. There was somebody else who had rented a good chunk of the resort. And I said, well, that's just really cool. Everybody's relaxed. Everybody's hanging out. It's fun. I mean, I'd like to do that someday. And that was way before Bitcoin. So as the industry started, I said, that probably is a fit for this space. And I wanted to design a conference, an event that I would like to go to, something that I would want to attend. I'm a little bit quirky like everybody. I'm a little bit of an introvert. I prefer a smaller event. I liked the idea of kind of elite connections. And my favorite part of events, for a lot of people's favorite parts of events, is the side conversations and the side meetings and the dinners and stuff like that. And I'm also not a big fan of logistics. I don't like, oh, where are we going here? Let's get an Uber. How about your Uber? Let's carpool in this and go here. I like to just have everything in one place. So I just tried to design something around my own likes. And over time that's evolved. We've been lucky enough now. We're coming up on our 12th year now. And so we've just fine-tuned each time and made slight improvements, and it's worked more and more smooth. And we've just kind of doubled down again and again on those things that make it work. And, sort of found our audience, which has been great. It's been a great success, and it's a real honor. And it's just a thrill to be a part of such a thing.
Yes, it's very important for the community to create these spaces where people can gather and create new things and can connect and can really bond.
Yes.
And it's something that's very important because we can see that this space can be transactional sometimes. So having these conversations and spending time with people for many days or for hours, it's very important. Let's talk about something or a debate or a conversation that you had during the Satoshi Roundtable. How this change or impact the way you perceive Bitcoin and crypto?
There's been a lot of interesting conversations. I think probably one of the most interesting was from the worst year, and maybe one of the worst conversations, and that was Roundtable 2, which was all focused on the block size. And Roundtable 2 was definitely, I would say, the worst roundtable. Everybody was angry at each other. Half of the group was fighting the other half about, well, there was some people who didn't want to, they were more interested in Ethereum. They didn't want to hear about either of it. But it was mostly Bitcoiners, as it always is. And a good chunk were on different sides of this block size battle. And you had all of the sort of famous players in the space. You had Adam Back and Gavin Andreessen and Roger Ver and Peter Todd and developers and CEOs. Brian Armstrong was there. Everybody kind of in the same room with varying opinions. It also was not a great resort. It was probably the worst venue we've had, and the weather wasn't that great. So it was just kind of like definitely not the best roundtable, but it was also very historic because you had these conversations and you had all of these people who cared a great deal. And I learned a lot, and I evolved my opinions on kind of the nature of risk and cypherpunk values and what is important and security and scaling and all of these kind of things. And, the thing I'm probably most impressed by is the passion. Even by then, even at Roundtable 2, a lot of the people had already been successful. They didn't need to do this. They didn't need to, some of them didn't even need to work even back then, but they care. They care a lot about it, and very, very, very passionately. Unfortunately, that was so passionate, friendships were lost, and, people were angry, and there was still fallout to this day over it. But I think that was definitely very interesting and impactful. And it was great to have a front row seat to that.
Yes. And let's talk about adoption. The adoption of Bitcoin is growing in the UAE. Do you think this region could be a hub for crypto and can play a very big role on the adoption of this new technology?
Sure. Yeah. UAE had a great head start over the last 5 years or so, particularly as the US has failed with overregulation, burdensome rules. The technology is permissionless and it's borderless. So people they can vote with their feet. It's very easy for people to go to a new jurisdiction and set up. It's very easy for people to move. A lot of people are very remote. They don't have a big factory to move. They can move pretty easily. And UAE did very, very well with that, attracting thousands and thousands of people. Even from the Roundtable alone, there's like a couple hundred people that have moved here. Some people, there's over 100 people who had never even been here before. They came here, they looked around, liked it, and stayed, and got golden visas. And we have even a program with the government helps some of the attendees get the visas. And it's done very, very well at attracting thousands of some of the best entrepreneurs. But the thing I would caution, as with all jurisdictions, they've got to be careful with overregulation, because a lot of times what happens in your typical jurisdiction, you have freedom and everybody comes because of the freedom. And then somebody comes along, some politician comes along and says, well, let's make it more like the US. Let's be more like Gary Gensler and add more and more and more regulations. And that will kill innovation. And then people say, well, that's no good anymore. I don't want to be part of that. And they'll go wherever it's easiest. So any jurisdiction in the world should focus on being as easy as you can and as free as you can. And UAE has been very good about that throughout its history, been very pro-merchant, pro-business. And if they keep that, then they can maintain their lead. They have a great lead. They can maintain it and strengthen it even. But they should definitely be cautious because there's more regulations. I've been coming here for over 20 years. Every year I've come, there's a little bit more regulation, and that does concern me. They need to go the other way and have less regulation for sure.
Yes. Some people say that Bitcoin and crypto can be tools for freedom. And other people says that it could be the opposite. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it could be. It's definitely, I think, decentralization, particularly, and there's two different things. You have Bitcoin as money, and if you have freedom money that is not issued by the state, that in itself creates more freedom because you don't have a centralized government that's printing money. And in the United States' case, and everybody who's pegged to the United States, including here and Saudi Arabia and many other countries, they are they're printing money from thin air and giving it to cronies and wars and things like that. So having an alternative to that is huge. Gold was a great alternative for thousands of years and has been used all over the world. Gold is a great form of money, and Bitcoin is like digital gold. So from a money standpoint, it does increase freedom. From the crypto standpoint, crypto is not always money. There's a few forms of money like Monero. But just the idea of decentralizing, making it so you don't need to trust third parties. You can trust more in code. I love the phrasing "code we trust." That's kind of cool. To trust code, to trust math, to trust cryptography. I think that's very, very valuable and exciting, and it's a way to create more freedom. There's some drawbacks of being able to track people and things like that. And you have to watch, are CBDCs crypto? I guess so. And that would be a horrible form of crypto, having a government authority that can track people's money and even worse, shut off money like they did in Canada. That would be a tragic thing that could actually decrease freedom. But in general, if you have like Bitcoin, freedom money, other forms of freedom money, and decentralized technology, I think it'll definitely move freedom forward in the world.
Yeah, you talk about liberty. What do you think are the biggest threats to freedom and how Bitcoin can be helpful in these cases?
Yeah, one of the biggest threats to freedom is ourselves. Humans are naturally free. We're born free. We have natural rights just like an animal has a right to get food. We have a right to forage for food and voluntarily interact and speak. We have our voice and our words and our thoughts, and our natural state is free. And people are the biggest enemy to that. People accept tyranny of some sort. They accept this idea that somebody else should rule over you and be in charge of you. And in some cases, there can be benefits of that, but in many, many cases and throughout human history, that can be very, very destructive. It can be very damaging, and it causes a lot of death and destruction. And governments have killed 300 million of their own people in the last century. It's one of the greatest forces of destruction. So people need to recognize that. People need to recognize the dangers of these kind of centralized powers and really move more towards things like Bitcoin, freedom money, and say, we're going to limit the power of the state, because the state, there's a legitimate place for the state in certain things, protection of life, liberty, and property, but it's got to be recognized. The people are the biggest obstacle, because they've got to recognize that the state is a very, very, very dangerous thing, and it should be viewed with extreme caution. It's like the most deadly virus. You say, oh boy, is there any other way to do this other than passing a law? Most people, and it's the citizens that drive this, the first thing they think of is, oh, well, I don't like this. Let's pass a law. We have this guy in the United States, Bernie Sanders. He said there's too many deodorant. And he didn't like how Uber operates. He doesn't like how hedge fund managers make too much money. His first reaction is pass a new law and a new law and a new law. My first reaction is that's tyranny. That is backed by violence, and violence against peaceful people is evil. So it's basically evil. And I want to avoid it at all costs. If there's a problem, there's many problems in the world. Drugs is a problem. A lot of things are a problem. But I'd much rather see a non-government solution. I'd like to exhaust, okay, let's try everything first before we go and bring in the tyrants with guns, because that's what government is at the end of the day. It's the ability to use force against people.
Yeah, let's talk about regulations. What kind of regulations do you think make sense for crypto?
The only kind of regulations that are legitimate and moral in the world for any kind of regulation, crypto or any other industry, are laws that protect life, liberty, and property. That's it. And including in property, you can include enforcement of contracts if the people agree on the contract. But that's it. Because again, government is force. Government is violence. What makes government unique is the ability to point a gun at a person, put them in a cage, the ability to do violence to someone else. That's what government is. It's not a suggestion. It's not a club. It's not a voluntary thing. If it was voluntary, you wouldn't need government. You just do it. It was voluntary. But it is force and it is violence against people. And so the big question when it comes to regulation of any industry, including crypto or any law, you want to step back for a moment and say, when is it moral to harm another person? When is it moral to point a gun at somebody? When is it moral for somebody to punch you? When is it moral for somebody to cage you and capture you and put you in handcuffs or point a firearm at you or point a weapon at you? When is that moral? And you need to put it in this perspective. You need to think about actual human beings. You need to think about, because they want to distract you from this and say, oh, that's not what it is. It's something else. But that's really what it is at the end of the day. It's violence against people. And many people who are very pro-law, a lot of people on the left who love laws, all kinds of laws, they consider themselves peaceful people. But they need to see the gun in the room. They need to see that it's violent. They need to see that this is a violent thing. And the question you need to say is, when is it moral to point a gun at somebody? When is it moral to do violence? And the only answer I can think of is if you're protecting somebody's life, liberty, or property, if it's defense. If somebody attacks somebody, you can defend. Or if you are engaging in justice to a crime against your life, liberty, and property. Somebody steals from you, yes, you can use violence. Somebody shoots you in the leg, you can shoot them back. These are legitimate forms of violence. Somebody doesn't fill out a form somebody didn't do AML, KYC, or some nonsense like that. That's not legitimate. You have no moral authority whatsoever. Zero, none, absolutely none. You have no moral authority to point a gun at somebody because they didn't fill out a form, or they didn't do a paperwork, or they didn't get a license. These things are completely illegitimate, and they should be called out by good moral people for the violent thuggery that they are. These are evil acts against peaceful people in many cases, and they also grind the world to a halt and cause all kinds of other damage. So they need to be recognized as violent acts. So the answer is no regulation other than protection of life, liberty, and property. It should be illegal to steal somebody's coins. It should be illegal to do a wrench attack on somebody and say, give me your Bitcoin. It should be illegal to hack. But that's kind of it. Protection of life, liberty, and property, that's it. All of the other things, AML, KYC, accredited investor rules, licensing, professional licensing, all of this completely illegitimate, completely immoral. And I'd go one step further and say evil. It's evil, and it doesn't belong in our world at all. I wish it was stamped out and we didn't have any of it. So I'd scrap all the regulations other than the actual moral ones that relate to protection of life, liberty, and property.
This is connected to my next question, because Bitcoin cannot be stopped. So why we should care or think about regulations?
It can't be stopped technically, but it certainly can be hindered. And as moral people, we should be against the use of force against peaceful people. We should be against all of these regulations that harm peaceful people. And it can certainly hurt people. You can say that you can't technically stop it, but even me as a very bullish, pure Bitcoiner, if they made it a felony in my country, if I went home, if that, I call her the cackling commie, if she would have won, if Kamala would have won, and they made some crazy rule that said, Bitcoin's a felony, well, I don't want to commit a felony. Even somebody like me, a hardcore Bitcoiner, I'd either figure out a way to move or leave. I'm not going to risk getting thrown in a cage because of some whims of some tyrant. So it can be very dangerous, and you want to fight back against that and look for ways to have freedom.
Yes. Some people worry that big corporations, not governments, can control Bitcoin mining or infrastructure. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, mining centralization is an issue. There's only a handful of major companies that control mining. If they control a good chunk of it, it is an issue. It's been talked about as an issue since I first started in Bitcoin. There's always been kind of, if these three pool together, then that's going to be 51%. And there are some risks of that. Just because they have 51% doesn't necessarily mean, first of all, it doesn't mean they're bad actors. And it doesn't necessarily mean they can they only have limited power. They can't steal your coins, for example. They could do other things that would be bad. One danger would be pushing through some kind of AML, KYC thing in the code. And you have big companies like BlackRock, for example, where are huge holders. And they could say, okay, if I was going to attack Bitcoin, I would try and embed people within the community doing the code over time. And then you have a fork that adds something horrible like AML, KYC. And then you have big players like BlackRock say, well, this is the real Bitcoin. And then the cypherpunks and the freedom people say, well, no, it isn't. But if that's the one that's in the ETFs and the exchanges and governments and others could co-opt it, that is a danger. That would be an attack vector. It becomes less of an attack vector as more parties in the world participate and more people are aware of these kind of things. But yeah, there is always some risk. We should always be on guard about different risks in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is very, very strong and very resilient, but that's partly because there's 1,000 murder hornets out there looking at how it can be attacked. So we should always be aware of mining and corporate centralization and other issues that can be used as attack vector on the technology.
Yes, and with all these investments and attention, can Bitcoin stay true to its original vision?
I certainly hope so. I think it's important to talk about the original vision. In the early days, Bitcoin was 99% libertarians. It was libertarians and anarcho-capitalists. That's it. And I dressed like this at that first Bitcoin event, and people thought wow, who's this Wall Street guy with the suit? Now these words that I'm saying now may sound radical to some, but I was considered the other way. I was like the statist Wall Street guy when I first came in by most people's impression. It was very, very cypherpunk, very hardcore libertarian ANCAP. That's the origins of this space. And as it's become bigger and bigger and bigger, There's more people like me are now in the minority. And you have more people who think that things like AML, KYC are legitimate, who don't care about freedom money. They think governments are legitimate. They think CBDCs are legitimate. They think central banks are a good idea. They like centralized power. I mean, there's even people in our community that voted for tyranny in our elections in the United States. So it is bigger, and as the bigger we get, the more we move away from that. There's also a lot of people chasing a quick buck. I go to some of the big events and I look around, I'm like, boy, I don't recognize this industry. This is definitely very, very different from that first one that I went to in 2012, 2013.
Yeah. If Bitcoin succeed in everything it was meant to be, how do you see the world in 10 years?
If it could succeed in 10 years at really becoming a true global money force and becoming the global money standard, the Bitcoin standard, like the title of the book, just like we've had gold standard before, where you have countries like the United States who own significant Bitcoin and back their reserves with real sound money instead of fiat money. We have a very, very different world. We have a world with way less problems. We have a much more peaceful world. Almost every problem you can think of can be tracked to this filthy fiat money system of printing money from thin air. And the great religions of the world are against this for a reason. And because I think it is truly evil. And if you point to anything, if I say, what are the top 5 horrible things in the world? Everybody's going to have a different issue. Most people mention war, global conflict. Well, that's directly and totally completely related to fiat. Even things like obesity. We have obesity in the United States because of seed oils and because of the electoral college system and because of corn subsidies and all of this other stuff, which relates to fiat. You have bad science. You have COVID tyranny, the face masks and the mandatory injections. Again, traces back to fiat. You name a problem in the world, I'll pretty quickly show you whether it's a big problem or a small problem. One time I went into a pharmacy in Germany and I was buying some stuff and they said I had to buy the aspirin separately. I could buy my water here and my aspirin here at 2 different cash registers. I'm like, immediately I knew that's a government, that's fiat. That's anything that stupid, it's got to be fiat. It's got to be some dumb regulation that some pinheaded politician fueled by fiat put in there. Any bad science, all of this horrifically destructive stuff with gender that we see in the United States, all of the great evils in the world, from the biggest wars to the smallest microaggressions, almost all of them trace back to fiat. Fiat's evil and it's horrible. So if Bitcoin realizes its goal would go back to sound money, which is the natural state of humans, it's the way that humans have been for thousands of years, and we won't have this nonsense, and the world will be a much more peaceful place with less people in prison, less people at war, less people dying, and more people healthy.
Wow, I would love to see that. I can't wait to see what's the future of Bitcoin. And for people who believe in decentralization and freedom, what they should be doing right now to make sure they are adding value to this movement?
I think being aware of it and talking about it, we can't shout loud enough because there is 98% of the world that's sort of in this broken system, this fiat-based system, and you have it all over the world where all of the academic institutions, the so-called science institutions, obviously government and anything related to government, these NGOs and charities, and it's all sort of tied into this very, very deeply broken system. And like I say, not just broken, but evil. It's actually evil. And it's tied into an evil system that causes a lot of problems. And we need to be aware of it. And we need to shout it at the top of our lungs. Even if it sounds radical, we need to call it out and call it out for what it is and say, this is wrong. We need to move to a better world. This isn't the natural state of humanity. The natural state of humanity for thousands of years is voluntary trade, where you do not have this kind of central power that can just print money from thin air. The idea that government can just print money from thin air is absurd. Why would they be able to do that? If that made sense, then I have $1 trillion Zimbabwe note in my pocket. If that was true, I could buy a castle and a Gulfstream with that note. But that note is just a novelty that I carry around for these kind of conversations. Governments don't have the ability to print money. It's an absurd notion. Money is decided by what people gravitate to based on its scarcity and usability and other factors. So, like gold. And gold is a good form of money, and Bitcoin is an even better form of money. So we need to be aware of that. We need to call it out, even though it may sound crazy. And the reason it sounds crazy is because we have the media and Hollywood and academia and science and government and NGOs and charities and everything, all motivated by this very evil and deeply broken system to push this nonsensical, filthy fiat on us when we have better forms of sound money that we can go to.
Yes, I think people really need to take the time to understand how the whole work works and how they can change the way they live. Because as you mentioned, yeah, we are very influenced by media, by movies, and it's very subconscious because maybe we don't realize that we are being educated by movies that seem so cute or that seem so fun. So what do you suggest to someone who has zero idea about crypto and wants to get into that? Because now we see that lots of people are entering the space through meme coins and they don't know what to do with them because they believe maybe they can make lots of money. However, most of the meme coins are not making them rich.
Right.
So what will be the best way to adopt Bitcoin or crypto?
I would stay away from meme coins, especially as an investment. I think the concept is wonderful. I think the idea of trading collectibles is very fun and wonderful, but unfortunately it's gotten completely out of hand with these crazy valuations. It's the kind of thing that you should put $100 in, or what to you is a very, very, very small amount of money, the equivalent of a meal, basically. It's not the kind of thing you should do as an investment. And to answer your question about what the best way to learn is, it's sort of the opposite of that. I think the most fundamental thing you can do is ask yourself, what is money? And learn what is money. I've met people who are billionaires and PhDs and governors and ministers and central bank heads all over the world who I ask them, what is money? And a lot of people don't have an answer. I was a financial advisor for 20 years. And I bet you if 15 years ago, I'd love to know, I'd love to take a time machine, go back and ask myself what I thought money was. Because I don't think I probably had a good answer. The best answer you might hear somebody say is something about a medium of exchange. And then you want to say, okay, well, what makes good money good? Why is some forms of money better? Why did the Zimbabwe notes fail? Why did the Weimar Republic fail? Why has gold been around so long? And what is the failings of gold? What makes gold not? Why don't we pay for our Starbucks with gold? And that's a very, very fundamental thing. Anybody interested in money should first know what it is and what makes good forms of money. It's very, very basic, but it is not common. And like I say, even as a financial professional, I don't think I would have had a good answer for that for the first 20 years of my career. So I would encourage everybody to be able to answer what is money and what makes good money good and why, and then have a good solid answer for that makes sense.
Wow, yes, we definitely need to take the time to learn about money. So I would love to know from you, what is money and what is good money?
Well, money is a medium of exchange, and what makes good money is the properties of money. So throughout human history, long before Bitcoin, there's been certain things that make money money. Is it uniform? Is $1 for me the same as $1 for you? Is it accepted? Will people accept it? Gold is kind of accepted. You can't buy your Starbucks with it, but I can melt down 1 ounce of gold or 33 grams of gold, and I can sell it pretty much anywhere in the world, small town, large town, and it's going to be worth pretty much the same. So usability, acceptability, is it divisible? There was Yap Island stones. These giant stones were money, and that was not a good form of money. Is it portable? Can you move it around? Bitcoin is great for that because you could even put it in your head, or you could put it on a piece of paper. You could disguise it. Gold is a little bit harder to move around in big quantities. If you want to move a couple $1 million worth of gold, it's very, very hard. What else? Is it limited in supply? Sand is not good money because there's just too much of it. You can't say, well, I can't go grab some sand and try and trade it to you. You're going to say, grab your own sand. So that's, again, why something like gold or silver metals tend to be better forms of money, because they're limited in supply. And that's, by the way, why Weimar Republic and Zimbabwe dollar, and to some degree the US and euro and anybody pegged, has been harmed, because it's unlimited supply. You can just print it from thin air. And durability is another one. So is something durable? Steak is great. It's valuable. It meets almost all those criteria, but it's a terrible form of money because it only lasts for a few hours, and after a few days, it's completely useless. So I could maybe pay for something with some steaks, but then you're going to take those steaks, you have to eat them or use them. You're not going to be able to keep using that as money. So you want something that's durable, like Bitcoin or gold, that just lasts for a long time. So those sort of 6 principles or so, those are the properties of money. If you Google properties of money, you're going to get some variation of that. And that, like I say, predates Bitcoin. Those are the kind of things that have made good money good. And you want to look at any form of money that you're using day to day, whether it's the euro or the dollar or Bitcoin or Dogecoin or gold or silver, and say, well, how does it stack up? Each one has its own advantages and disadvantages. Gold is very durable. It's not super divisible. The US dollar is very widely accepted, but it has been printed out of thin air quite a bit, so its supply is not limited. Each one has its own disadvantages. Bitcoin is quite good. Bitcoin acceptability is one thing that it's lacking. It's not accepted everywhere, but just like gold, you can kind of move your Bitcoin or use it with a little bit of effort. You can go to almost any city. And it's unfortunate. It used to be easier, actually, 5-10 years ago. It was easier to go to any city in the world, and you could do things called local Bitcoins, and you just meet somebody and you give them Bitcoin and they take cash. Unfortunately, regulators do what they're going to do. They come in and wreck things and break things and threaten people with violence over doing peaceful transactions. So they've made that harder, but that's a separate issue. But the form of money is quite good. And so meeting those principles is important. And historically, humans have always gravitated towards those forms of money that meet those kind of principles. This isn't something that's a crypto thing. It's not a Bitcoin thing. This is something that's part of sort of history and part of economics for a long time, going back way before Bitcoin. These are just principles of reality of how the world works.
Yeah. Something that I share on my Spanish YouTube channel is that it's a story that my mom told me that back in the day, her grandmother used to exchange her chicken with cows. And it was very interesting because, they, have different animals, so they could exchange those for value. So for them, it's just, as you mentioned, the easiest way to see money is as an exchange of value. Mm-hmm. So I think now, if we think about it, we can understand more how we can keep making more money if we want to. And then you know how to use technology, how to use Bitcoin, how to use blockchain. I'm very curious to know more about your opinion on governments. We see some governments as El Salvador, making Bitcoin a source of, exchange of value. But then we have other governments that are banning this currency. So what do you think about this interesting balance between these countries and these other countries?
Yeah, ideally governments would be out of the money business entirely. If you went and asked 100 people anywhere in the world what is important about government, and in the US, you'd have Republicans on one side, Democrats on the other side, everybody in between. And this goes anywhere you go in the world, you're going to have people of varying opinions. Almost nobody would list money. They might list healthcare, they might list freedom, they might list gun rights, they might list, any number of different things. Almost nobody's going to, the idea that government should be in the money business is sort of flawed. So I'd rather see governments not have anything to do with it. If they must do it, at least have something backed by sound money, like the dollar used to be, or backing it like Bitcoin, which is the direction that hopefully the United States is going now under President Trump, and hopefully the direction that countries like El Salvador are doing. And as far as banning it on the other extreme, again, that goes back to morality and ethics. It's just simply not ethical because a ban means violence. It means that if you don't do it, we're going to do violence to you. And that is completely unethical. You don't have any right to do violence to somebody because they choose to use these goofy math-based widgets that we call Bitcoin or Ethereum or Doge or anything else for that matter. Even things that some people call scams, even things that are maybe way, way overpriced like memes. I don't think there should be any regulation against any of these things. It's illegitimate use of force. It's not legitimate for somebody to point a gun. You need to picture, whenever you think of the word regulation or law, you've got to picture somebody pointing a gun at somebody, because that's what it is at the end of the day. If you say no, you're eventually going to be a victim of violence. And it is not legitimate, no matter how bad you dislike meme coins. There's some coins that I really don't like. I think they're very scammy. But if they're telling the truth, now if they're fraud, that's a different story. But if they are telling the truth and they're way overpriced, or it's just a stupid idea, it's just absolutely not legitimate for government to use force against those people. So that is immoral and it's evil. And any government that does that and any politician that advocates that is wrong.
Yeah, something important on this is that there is a lot of scams on crypto. So how people can be aware of this, and instead of, going to a place where they say, yeah, well, you will do 100x, 1000x, they can be more safe and they can go for the right path.
Yeah. I mean, the best regulator is the markets. We had this ICO wave in 2016, 2017. And what stopped that was not the government. The government didn't even catch up until 5 years later. What stopped it was the market forces. It was a lot of dumb ideas and people lost money. And so they said, gee, my cousin Tony put 40,000 euros in that coin and it crashed. And the word ICO and tokens became something people, and white papers became something people were cautious of. And it happened much faster than the government. And if you allow the market to work, there's no world where, see, you have all these tyrants that are getting in the way saying like, oh, we have to protect the people. For one thing, they fail at protecting the people, but they're not needed anyway, even for the things that actually are scams, because there's no world where these things just keep working. Like, oh yeah, if the government didn't step in, the ICOs would have gone to $1 trillion and all the money would be there and it would stay there forever. Well, if that happened, it wouldn't be a scam. They don't go up forever. They crash down. Things that are bad investments, the market figures that out. And the market is a lot smarter than politicians in fancy offices paid for with money that they stole from people. The market knows what has value and very, very well. And it's not the place of anybody to try and second guess that. If the market thinks it has value, it has value. If it doesn't, it doesn't. You don't need anybody to be interfering. And so letting the market work is the best force. And the only regulations, like I say, actual fraud, if somebody lies, if they say, Mark Zuckerberg is on my board, he's my co-founder, and that's false, then, well, that is a legitimately fraud. That's a little different thing. That goes into the area of, like I say, legitimate laws. That could be a legitimate law, especially if you have a contract and you've agreed and you say, I'm signing a contract with you. I promise you that Zuckerberg is on my board and you give me $1 million and we're signing this contract under the laws of Spain or US or Taiwan or UAE. And then you find out, say, wait a minute, Zuckerberg, you don't even know Zuckerberg. Now, if somebody has lied, then you have a legitimate claim. And then you can have the government enforce that if the people agree and if somebody lies. So in some cases, there is a place for government interference, and especially enforcement of contracts or outright fraud. Somebody, you put money in and they just take it and they say that they're going to hire employees and they buy cars or they just steal it or whatever. But that's not what we see generally. 99% of the rules are prosecution of innocent people who haven't done anything wrong. AML KYC sort of assumes that 1 billion people around the world are criminals and makes money a crime and makes moving and all of these other kind of things that have nothing to do with legitimate moral laws related to protection of life, liberty, and property.
Wow, so many things to talk about. Let's talk about you, Bruce. I grew up in Latin America and I got influenced by the US. And now I live here in Dubai for the past 5 years. And you have been in both places, the US and the Middle East. What are the main takeaways or how your mindset changed because you have this exposure to both sides of the world?
Yeah, I've been really lucky to spend a lot of time in this part of the world, not just UAE, but also Saudi Arabia. I've spent a ton of time in Saudi Arabia. I've lived there. And there is differences. Saudi and UAE are different. The people from each will tell you this first, and they were both proud of their own countries and their own differences. So it is a different place, but there is some similarities with I've been to all the GCC states. I've been to every country in the Middle East, and there is differences. A lot of the the Gulf Cooperative Council states, Qatar, Oman, Bahrain, UAE, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, there is some similarities. I love the culture. There's a lot of neat things that we can learn from this part of the world. The emphasis on family, the long-term relationships, the sort of social aspect. And when I say social, I don't mean nightclubs, although here in Dubai, there's tons of nightclubs, but I'm more talking about what I think of in the Saudi way, like majlises or gatherings, where you get around and you have a 4 or 5 hour dinner. It's very, very, very common as part of Saudi culture, just like pub culture is very common in London. And I love that. I think it's a great way to get to know people. I know people and I see a lot of my Saudi friends more and get to know them better than my American friends. It's just not common in America to see your friends this often. And I see my good friends a few times a year, not once a week, twice a week, like you would in Saudi Arabia or here in UAE. So I think there's a lot that we can learn. Each culture has its own, strengths and weaknesses. There's some things that the United States is very good at, innovating this sort of freedom, our motto of being a free country, which isn't always true, especially in recent years. But at least it's in our ethos. It's in our desire to be free and our desire to reward boldness. Our history was very much influenced by frontiers people who went out and did the Oregon Trail and did dangerous things and built and created gold mines in California and just did bold, crazy things and built, New York when it was very much like UAE with all kinds of construction and everything. So there's a lot of advantages the US has as well. And I love, one of the great things about travel is that you can see the sort of best of different worlds. And I try and instill in my kids, the best of our culture and the best of Saudi and Emirati culture and anywhere else that we go.
Yes, there is a lot of culture here. I love the way people live here, especially family. It's very attached to my culture as well. I would love to know the books that you can recommend to us that shape the way you see the world.
When it comes to Bitcoin, I always recommend Safety and Amos, the Bitcoin standard. And I like maybe the fiat standard, maybe even better. And he has a couple other books. He's very good. Andreas Antonopoulos was one of the first early Bitcoiners. He wrote Mastering Bitcoin. He was sort of a legend in the early days. A lot of the books, like the thinking of people like Rothbard and Mises, Milton Friedman, Free to Choose is a good book. These books talk about freedom and human rights. If you look at fiction of famous, Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged is kind of a, libertarian fiction masterpiece. It talks about in a very engaging and interesting way, talks about the dangers of centralized power and government and tyranny and the value of freedom and individualism. There's some flaws in her philosophy, and the book is fiction and it's not perfect, and she wasn't perfect, but there's certainly, that's kind of something everybody should read. And I like, some of my favorite books are things like fiction. I love Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, Dune. And I think those things are important because it creates imagination. I think one thing that's served me really well in life is having a good imagination, because you can see, like, well, when I came here in 2002 and say, wow, I can envision it. I have an imagination that says this is going to be a great city. Or when I went to that first Bitcoin meetup, I said, this is going to be some kind of cool technology. It's nice to have a vision and imagination and creativity. A lot of time people in business don't think of these kind of things, but I think it's very, very important. It's one of the most, you wouldn't have anything cool. You wouldn't have Bitcoin, you wouldn't have Apple, you wouldn't have mobile phones, you wouldn't have television or anything if we didn't have people who imagined something cool and better first. And then, good religious, the Quran, the Bible, the gospel, having like universal truths, system of how the world works and why we're here. That you can't underestimate that either if you're listing great books. So yeah, I think a good variety of these kind of things, that everybody should sort of touch on. There's so much great out there, and it's so easily accessible. A lot of people are doing audiobooks now, so you can consume more faster. You get good at listening to it. You get used to listening to it on high speed, and you can listen again and again. So it's just one of the other great blessings of technology that we have in the world.
Yeah, now I'm curious to know, what is the relationship between religion and Bitcoin, if it's any?
Well, one thing that I'm very interested in this part of the world is the discussion about Bitcoin being haram or halal. So haram is forbidden, halal is permitted, kind of like kosher for people who don't know. And there's a very vibrant and interesting discussion among a small group of people. There's a lot of Muslim Bitcoiners, like Sheikh Mawia Tucker and the people with Twitter handle Muslim Bitcoiner and others like this who follow this. And being as objective as I can, I would say it is not widely accepted. So in Islam, there's a lot of people who are, a lot is driven by scholars, people who are knowledgeable, people who have a great deal of knowledge about religion and about their faith. And it's not widely either understood or accepted by a lot of Islamic scholars, to be fair. And there's this smaller group that is very passionate about it. And I'm certainly not qualified to, I have my own opinions, but I'm not qualified to say one way or another. I can point people to the experts on either side and let them argue it out. I believe that the idea that God said that fiat is evil. So there's some people who say riba includes fiat. Riba is prohibited in the Quran. And not only Bitcoiners. There's actually some scholars who are against Bitcoin, but also against fiat. They say that fiat is riba, fiat is haram because it's evil, because it's backed by debt and scams and other things that Muslims generally agree are forbidden. And again, I'll leave that argument to them, but I do find it very, very fascinating that there is this idea among a subset of people who says that God did say that this fiat money is forbidden and is evil. And that resonates for me because it is evil. It is evil. It's pure evil. If you ask anybody of any religion, Muslim, Christian, whatever, if you ask what is evil in the world, top of the list is probably going to be war, global war, destruction, whatever side they may be on. They're going to all agree that it's evil to have death and destruction, killing of children, and these kind of things are horrible, horrible evils. Pretty much everybody in the world is going to agree different major global conflicts are evil. Almost everybody in the world is going to agree that massive imprisonment of people is evil. And all of these things are driven by fiat. They're driven by fiat, and I find it very fascinating to think of the idea that maybe God did warn us this. And it's not just Islam, it's also in Christianity, Judaism, and many other religions, where there's this idea that there is a faith prohibition against this kind of thing. And that would make sense. Of all the things, if we do have intelligent design and God is directing us, of all of the things in the world that God would warn about, wouldn't he warn against the greatest evil there is, which is fiat? Just because we use it all and it's in my pocket doesn't mean it's any less evil. It is absolutely, positively evil. It is the reason that we were in Iraq for 20 years, it killing 1 million people ultimately. It is the reason that World War I and World War II, it is the reason that great evils have happened. It is the reason that Stalin killed millions of people. It is the reason that there are people in gulags and prisons and for-profit prisons for victimless crimes. It is the reason that you have even things like obesity and bad science and tyranny, this tyranny where they told people they had to take an injection or they're going to lose their job, that they have to wear a face diaper on their face or they're going to be thrown in a prison and they're not allowed to have freedom. This all traces back to fiat. It traces back to evil corruption of government. So I find the idea that God perhaps sent us a message and said that this is, in regards to what faith you are, the idea that this is something that is a message was sent to us that said that this is evil, I think that resonates really well because it is evil. I know in my heart it's evil. I'm not a scholar of any religion. I can't speak on that level, but I can speak as a human who understands morality, who can look in my eye and see what evil is. And I know that fiat is evil. I know that almost every single thing that I care about deeply in the world, whether it's the evils of for-profit prisons or the evils of global war or our misadventures in Iraq and Afghanistan and all of the terrible things that my own country, which I love, have done, it all traces back to this evil, broken system of fiat money. I find that very, very fascinating. It's one of the most amazing things that you can sort of study in the world. So I try and learn whatever I can about this, and I have very interesting conversations with people on all sides of this who have very, very different beliefs on the nature of depending what religion they are and what their beliefs are on what the nature of this is. But I think these are the important questions, because it comes back to this idea of morality and when is it moral to point a gun in somebody's face. There's not much that we can do that's higher than that as a human being. This is something that all moral people and ethical people should be asking and saying, are we good people? Are we doing the right thing? Are we doing violence to peaceful people? Are we doing violence in the wrong name? Because if you're hitting or hurting somebody and you're not supposed to, that's bad. And as simple as that is, and a 5-year-old should know that, the overwhelming majority of the world supports all kinds of stupidity and fiat and government intervention and everything else that at its core is very, very evil. So I think it is tied. And I think that the idea that religion might be an answer to this and tied to this great technology of Bitcoin and freedom money, I think is a fascinating question that I hope everybody spends at least a little bit of time, no matter what their faith or background is. I think everybody should think about this a little bit as moral people, to say what is morality and where is our place in the world and what do we support.
Wow, Bruce, you are full of very interesting insights. How people can keep following you and your journey?
Sure. Well, I'm on X, Bruce Fenton, and I'm around at different events and things like that. And I'm pretty active, as you know. I speak my mind, and I love to interact with people. I love to meet people that I talk to or hear from me, and it's a wonderful journey.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being here. It was
you.
a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching. Remember to share this with your friends, because everybody deserves to know more about Web3, AI, cryptocurrency, and blockchain. I'm Cristina Najera. See you next time.